what we've been taught and seen in media is not investing. It's day trading. It's like gambling for your money. It is risky. The stuff that you saw in Wolf of Wall Street is not what we're talking about.
Hey guys, welcome back to the First Hustle Then Brunch podcast. Oh my gosh, it feels so good to say that. It's been a minute. I think we recorded this episode back in October, like very early October. So yeah, it's been a while since I've recorded and I'm excited to get back into things. Today I'm speaking with Chloé Daniels, who is the founder of Clo Bare Money Coach. She is an educator focused on helping people learn how to invest and build wealth the lazy way, which you'll learn all about what that means. She's been featured on CNBC, Acorns, Entrepreneur, Bloomberg, Business Insider, Time, and more. Her ultimate goal is to provide education in a fun, easy to understand, and accessible way, and she's known for her reels and TikToks that showcase her terrible dance moves, she said it, not me, while also providing finance tips. Chloé shared a lot of really great nuggets if you're interested in learning more about investing, whether you're getting started for the first time or you already have an account, you just want to learn how to manage things better. She has shared some really valuable information in this episode, so let's go ahead and dive in. Hey Chloé, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to chat with you. Words.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this. I know we haven't done an episode on investing yet, so I know that's your specialty, so I'm excited to learn a lot more from you.
I'm excited too, and it's funny because I know your podcast, hustle is literally in the name, and I'm all about lazy investing so that people can hustle outside of their money management skills.
Yeah, I love that. I'm definitely on that train. I'm not a fan of hustle culture per se, so yeah, I'm excited to learn more about the lazy investing methods. So do you want to start by telling us a little bit about your personal finance journey and how you got to where you are today? I know a big part of your platform is showing how your net worth has changed. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, so I am not what anybody would expect to be a finance expert. I studied English and Spanish in college and was like fully planning on
oh, wow.
I was fully planning on struggling. I started my career at the tail end of the great financial crisis where people were still being laid off, and there were countries where people my age, there was like a 50% unemployment rate. So when I started off, I was just grateful to get a job. And I spent many years in my 20s just kind of like always just barely scraping by. There were definitely times when I would donate plasma to make rent or things like that.
Yeah.
And eventually I kept getting promoted at my 9 to 5, and we all have this like narrative in our head of like, once I get this promotion, then I'll have an emergency fund.
Yeah.
Or
there's always something.
Exactly. Like once I make this amount of money, then I'll start learning about how to save for retirement and stuff like that. And those milestones would happen, and I still just was always living paycheck to paycheck, no matter how much money I made, no matter what promotion I got. And so I finally had this moment where I was really, really tired of getting myself into bad situations because of money. And I was like, Chloé, dumber people than you have figured out how to do this before. So like, why not just try? And I kind of started running the numbers and understanding how quickly I could pay off my student loan debt if I just like really buckled down and paid attention to my finances. So I kind of started the journey with this idea that the ultimate goal was debt freedom. And then about a year and a half, 2 years in, with all the education that I was diving into, I really couldn't ignore the fact that debt freedom was really only a small part of wealth building. And I was missing this huge part of wealth building, which was investing and figuring out how to make your money actually work for you.
Yeah.
But I was so afraid of investing because, like, again, I studied English and Spanish. I'm like, these people are smarter than me. These people who know how to invest are like, yelling at each other on Wall Street. But the more and more I educated myself, the more and more I was just like, no, it's actually not as complicated as the financial industry wants us to believe it is. And so again, with that mantra of dumber people than me have figured this out before, I was like, we're just going to do it. And in 2020 was the first time I like logged into my 401k and picked my own investments, changed some things around. I did a lot of things wrong and I quickly learned.
Mm-hmm.
But from there, I just became obsessed because I had so many mental barriers and blockages around money and investing. And when I went to go learn about it at the time, there just wasn't that much information out there that was like interesting, fun, made it easy to understand. I felt like I needed like a master's in finance to understand some of the stuff I was reading. And so I just kind of started sharing my own journey, and that eventually transformed to like educating people as well, just because I felt like there really was missing my voice in the space. Somebody who is not a finance bro, who is not interested in like paying attention to what the stock market is doing on a daily basis, who really just wants to help people like get it set up and like forget about it, you know?
Yeah, I love that set and forget it.
Yeah. So that's really what I focus on, is trying to help people, you know, not feel so afraid and overwhelmed, and also to try and make it a little bit interesting.
Yeah. I think that's so important because you're right. There's a lot more content out there about debt freedom and paying off debt. I mean, the strategy behind that, you know. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Frugality was just too much for me.
Same.
It's like, no, you can't spend any money at all. Like, you can't, like those no spend months. I'm like, please don't sign me up for that.
Oh, and I used to buy into that because it was like, there's so much there were, at the time when I got started in personal finance, it was 2018 when I was like getting my own stuff together. And it was like the tail end of it. And it's like the only voices I knew of at the time were Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman. There was like a spattering of blogs and things like that. But I didn't even know like finance creators were a thing. And back in 2018, I don't think, like, there were few and far between. And a lot of them were like mommy blogs or frugal coupon cutting, like stuff like that, which has never been interesting to me. Like I can be a frugal person on specific things, but like there's only so much you can cut back that like, and like that's going to impact your quality of life. What we have to do.
Right. We're in our like 20s, 30s. Like nobody wants to stop spending altogether.
I want to live my best life. And like I have no shame in the fact that my best life is going to cost some money. So that was, again, like we're very much a wealth building education company. We are not a coupon cutting, frugal, like that's just not who we are. And that's not who I want to be, because it's like the 80-20 principle. I mean, 20% of your efforts are creating 80% of the impact. Well, building wealth, the 20% is increasing your income and learning how to manage that. It's not coupon cutting and cutting back.
Yeah, exactly. There's like no limit to how much money you can make and obviously what you can do with that, but you can only save so much. 100%. So yeah, I definitely feel like our focus has to kind of shift a little bit, which you just mentioned there were some mindset things that had to change. There's definitely some obstacles that everyone has to overcome when dealing with investing or getting started. So what are some common obstacles that you've heard people in their 20s and 30s are facing when it comes to getting started with investing?
I mean, we can't ignore the fact that there's a cost of living crisis happening right now. Like people are not making as much money as they should be making. Like I had a very controversial post talking about how, you know, a lot of finance creators on TikTok and Instagram will say like $100,000 isn't any money. And it's like, okay, but also only 18% of Americans are making $100,000. So the issue here is like, yes, $100,000 is not what it used to be. However, more Americans need to be making $100,000. $100,000 should not be so unachievable for so many people based off the cost of living, based off the housing crisis right now. So I think one is like, I have to recognize that that is an issue, and it's not an issue I can solve other than teaching you how to like get more income in. But I think kind of recognizing that it's like, it's not your fault. It's not you're just lazy. It's not you made all the wrong decisions. It's not like something wrong with you that you're bad with money. Like, no, we have major issues in this country when it comes to building wealth and making it accessible to everybody. So like, I think that helps people take some of the pressure off of like, oh, it's not me. I'm not stupid. I'm not bad with money. I'm just like facing this mountain of like impossible expectations for the American dream and what it used to be. So that's kind of like number one is like, don't be so hard on yourself. We are living in a messy, messy society right now, and a lot of people are struggling to get by. But that is number two is it's so important to do what you can to increase your income as much as possible. From the income side of things, I think that a lot of limiting beliefs that myself include included, had to overcome is this belief that like, you're not capable of making more money, that, oh, I'm just not in the right industry, or I don't have the right skill set. Like, I taught English in China. I had teaching skills when I came back to the United States. Like I said, I studied English and Spanish. I don't have a master's degree. I don't have any of those things. But like my soft skills and my ability to work with people made me a very valuable person in the workplace. And it's like learning how to leverage those skills. I truly believe that like most people can very easily make more money. It's about understanding what about you makes you special and how can you leverage those skills so that you can make more money without necessarily working harder. So I think that mindset shift is huge of like, okay, maybe I just need some help identifying areas in my life where actually these are applicable skills. Like I do that with my sister all the time when she's like applying for new jobs. I'm like, why didn't you talk about this? This is something so relevant to your position. And she just doesn't even see it or notice it. So
yeah, which happens a lot.
And it does. And that's why career coaches and resume writers and things like that are so important because you have skills. Like I guarantee you, everybody has a special skill set, and it's all about the positioning and making it relevant to whatever it is that you want, and also like keywords and things like that. So on the income side of things, I would say that's like the second biggest, or the second belief that we often run into. And then when it comes to investing, I think biggest hurdle we face is this belief that it's risky and I'm going to lose all my money in the stock market, that it's hard and it's complicated and all my hard-earned cash is just going to go out the door. And the reason we believe that is because what we've been taught and seen in media is not investing. It's day trading. It's like gambling for your money. It is risky. The stuff that you saw in Wolf of Wall Street is not what we're talking about. Right. Like what we talk about when it comes to wealth building through investing has nothing to do with like the stuff that's going on in those movies or even what you're seeing in the media. You know, if you're watching the news every single day and studying the stock market every single day, everybody's going to be stressed out. They're going to think that the world is ending literally at any given time. Yeah. And so you have to learn, one, how to invest in a way that you don't have to do that. And two, how to invest in a way that is aligned with your risk preference, aligned with your anxieties, aligned with your time frame, so that you understand how to create a portfolio that's not going to stress you out all the time. So I think that's a huge one. You know, there's been many, many studies that show the more diversified you are and the longer you stay invested, the less likely you are to lose money. And there's even a study done by BlackRock that showed that if you've invested for like in the S&P 500, for example, they looked at a course of almost 100-year time frame, and they looked at any given point in this time frame, what were your chances of making money versus your chances of losing money if you were just holding on for that time frame. And when we're looking at only holding on to the S&P 500 for a month, you held on and then you bought and sold within a month, you have like a 68% chance of making money, and you have like, or it might even be like 60-40, it's like close to 60-40, 60% chance of making money and a 40% chance of losing money. But once we zoom out to like 15 plus years, the chances of you losing money is like less than 1%. Oh, so wow. It's like, and yes. And that's why education is huge, because it takes that fear away. Like, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We're using these studies to provide context of what has happened before. There is always a possibility that there's a zombie apocalypse or something. And like, you know, we're all going to be worrying about other things than our portfolios. I can promise you then. So we do have to use history and understanding on how the stock market works to kind of help ease that anxiety.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I know for me, you know, I was also exposed to Dave Ramsey, Susie Orman, like all the people that you mentioned earlier. And they said like, stop, like while you're paying off debt, stop investing, you know, don't contribute to your 401k. So I was like, oh, okay. So I'm doing this all wrong. I need to stop contributing to my 401k. Okay. So then I start, you know, reading a little bit more and I'm like, wait, I should have been contributing this whole time. So I feel like there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of, I don't know if I should call it misinformation, but maybe not the best advice for everybody.
Yeah. It's one of those things where like I understand why that's the message, because it's an easy message. So many people
it's like focus on one thing.
Exactly. So many people get so overwhelmed and like in their eyes, that's the biggest issue, because like, oh, you're losing money to the interest rate. But it's like, it is so much more nuanced than that. So I think one of the reasons that the debt-free community is so effective in the messaging that they have is because it's simple. And simple is really easy to, number one, get people to buy in, because so many of us, we feel super overwhelmed when it comes to our finances.
Yeah.
So we want to be told, like, just focus on this one thing. And if you just focus on this one thing, you're going to, like, then you can move on to the next thing. The issue with that is that debt freedom can take years, that you could have been letting your money work for you, even if you're just doing a small amount. And it's like, it's going to be so nuanced based off of how old you are, how much money you've got to be able to be investing, how much time you have to let that money grow. And then also what your interest rates are and things like that. This idea that all debt is dumb, and this idea that you need to pause every wealth building activity while you're paying off debt, I think is pretty damaging because it's nuanced. It's so much more nuanced than just like, pay off all of your debt and don't make contributions to your 401k. The 401k thing is crazy to me because it's like, that is free money if you have an employer match. And it's like, you're never going to get a 100% return on your money, guaranteed, as long as, depending on the vesting schedule, you're never going to get that. So those pieces of advice is like, those are kind of the things that I am battling against when I am creating that messaging or creating our own messaging. But then also on the flip side, we've got people who are just afraid. And we also have people who are just like truly bought into this idea that debt is like this moral thing. And if you have debt, you're a bad person. Or if you have debt, you're a stupid person. Or if you have debt, you're bad at money. So it's really reworking some of that and educating people.
Yeah. There's so much mindset work when it comes to like money mindset specifically that people need to work on. And I don't think you even realize it, until you start learning more about it. Like, oh, not everyone thinks like this. Like, not everyone thinks that debt is bad.
Right. Well, it's so nuanced. You could talk to any multimillionaire, and I guarantee you their messaging is not debt is bad. Like, all of them have debt. You've seen celebrities take out mortgages because they understand their money is going to work a lot harder for them invested in the stock market or in other places than putting it all into one asset where they're essentially, especially when interest rates were lower than they are now. But like, historically speaking, our interest rates are still pretty low.
Yeah. So true. So I know we just jumped into the discussion a little bit. Can we back up and talk a little bit about terminology for anyone that's listening that has no clue what we're talking about when we talk about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, interest rates? Like, can you kind of explain a little bit of like the most common terms?
Okay, so when we're talking about terms, we'll go over a couple of basics. So when it comes to investing in the stock market, everything begins with a stock, right? So you can actually own a portion of a company, a very small portion of a company, by buying shares of the company's stock. So essentially, stock is like all of the shares that you could purchase of a company available on a stock market exchange. That could be the New York Stock Exchange, it could be the London Stock Exchange, it could be the Financial Times Exchange. There's so many of them. What exchange you're buying from doesn't really matter. Most of us we don't really necessarily think about the individual exchanges when you're a lazy investor, when you're an average Joe investor. You're just going to a brokerage, which a brokerage is like a Fidelity, a Vanguard, a Charles Schwab, a Robinhood, an Ellevest. It's essentially the storefront where you can go and make these purchases of stocks, bonds, other investment options out there. In terms of other investments, so other like common terms. So when we think about wealth building in the stock market, we're focusing on things like stocks, maybe some REITs, index funds, mutual funds, things like that. So REITs are just real estate investment trusts. So if you want to invest in real estate without having to buy physical property, you can do that through REITs. So if what a lot of people don't understand is that when you buy things like index funds, which I'll explain here in a second, a lot of times they have real estate inside of them. They have real estate investment trusts. So you're already getting real estate exposure when you're buying things like index funds, which is why I'm such a huge fan of funds. In terms of funds, so the way I like to explain funds, which is all encompassing of exchange traded funds, aka ETFs, mutual funds, index funds, things like that. The biggest difference between like a fund and an individual stock is, let's say you were like going to 7-Eleven and you're like, okay, I'm really craving something sweet, but I don't really know what I'm craving. And so you go and you stand in the candy aisle and you're like looking around and you're like, well, I'm just going to pick up this Kit Kat and hope it like serves my craving. That's kind of like buying an individual stock. You're like, I'm going to pick this one thing and I hope it's the thing that I need because I'm putting my eggs in this basket. Going and buying a fund, whether it's a mutual fund, an exchange traded fund, or an index fund, is like going into that 7-Eleven and seeing a Halloween sized bag of candy where you have hundreds, if not thousands of different stocks and bonds and REITs and things like that inside of it. So it's like, you know, for sure, there's a higher chance that something in there is going to fit your need. Something in there is going to fulfill that craving. Yeah. Rather than just like taking a bet on a single stock in this instance. So that's kind of like the difference between a fund and an individual stock, an individual bond, an individual REIT, is that you can get hundreds, if not thousands of stocks or bonds or whatever it is that you're purchasing with funds. Now, funds are going to come in many different forms. My favorites are index funds, which can be an ETF or a mutual fund. Index funds, the idea behind it is that instead of somebody being inside of the fund buying and selling all the time in order to try and make investors as much money as possible, which has been proven over and over again to be ineffective, and most of the time they're not going to make people more money. The opposite side of that are these index funds, which are passively managed, meaning no one is inside of the fund buying and selling on a daily basis. Instead, it's set up to mirror what the market is doing, whatever market you pick. So for example, let's say you buy an S&P 500 index fund. We hear about the S&P 500 all the time, which the S&P 500 is just 500 of the largest stocks in the US inside of it. That's it. So if you buy an S&P 500 index fund, you can bet you're going to have Apple, you're going to have Amazon, you're going to have Google, you're going to have Meta, you're going to have all these massive, massive companies in the US inside of it just for buying that one fund. Now, an index fund that's mirroring the S&P 500, if the S&P 500 contains 500 stocks inside of it, well, your S&P 500 index fund is also going to contain 500 stocks inside of it that's mirrored to perform how the S&P 500 is performing. So if the S&P 500 index goes up 10%, well, you can bet your S&P 500 index fund is also going to go up 10%. So the entire purpose is to do what the market is doing. And you can buy index funds that contain every single stock in the whole entire world inside of it. So it can be incredibly simple and incredibly easy. And the best part is you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to be like, oh no, Tesla's not doing well anymore. Like, should I pull it out of my portfolio? It's like the index fund is going to handle it for you. So I'm a huge fan of those. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds of like the difference between a mutual fund and an ETF, because I think that would be a little bit overwhelming for listeners. But essentially, you know, there are ways of buying things that are not as complicated as we think. You don't have to be out there picking individual stocks. And in fact, I don't recommend people be out there picking individual stocks because
it's like impossible
it doesn't work. If you, a beautiful experiment is to at any time search best performing stocks of 2020. Go look at the list and I guarantee you will not recognize likely even 5 of them. Maybe you'll recognize one. Maybe you'll recognize 2. Like I know Skechers is like was on one that I did recently, and I was like, okay, I recognize that. But like, you would never guess the stocks that were the best performers in any given individual year, and like that's what you're working against. So that's why we don't recommend doing it. Yeah, and that's where the risk is. That's where people get scared. Now, one other like term I did want to talk about is bonds. So when we're talking about wealth accumulation, we're talking about building wealth. What are the assets that we can buy to start building wealth? And that can look like stocks. It can look like those mutual funds, ETFs. It can look like even real estate, depending on how you approach it. It can look like buying businesses. Essentially, it's how do we make our money grow? Now, on the flip side of the coin, you've got wealth preservation tools. So how do we take some of this wealth that we have and preserve it and maybe let it grow a little bit so that it's not being outpaced by inflation? That's when things like bonds and fixed income investments are going to serve a purpose. And then the older that you get, the closer you get to accessing your money, or the closer you get to retirement, you're going to have more and more of these wealth preservation tools inside of it. Now, if you're 20 years old and you have no wealth to preserve, you're probably not going to have any bonds in your portfolio or any fixed income investments in your portfolio because you don't got any wealth to preserve. You know, the only reason you might have some bonds is if you're feeling really anxious and you want to have something in there that helps stabilize your portfolio a little bit. But the reason bonds and fixed income investments are a little bit more stable is because instead of you buying a portion of a company, you are essentially taking on, you're providing a loan. And you could be providing a loan to a government entity, which those are some of the safest bonds that you can purchase if you're in the US. You could be loaning money to a municipality, like a local government. You could be loaning money to a corporation. So there's a lot of different types of bonds, but the whole idea behind bonds is like, because you're loaning money, you're getting a set amount of money back. So the interest rate, the coupon that it's paying, you're going to get a set amount of interest rate or a set amount of a payment over a set period of time. And then they're going to mature at a certain date. And by when that maturity date is when you get all of it back plus whatever the interest that you were paid. So those are not like wealth building tools necessarily. Yeah. It's really focusing on that preservation.
Yeah. It's so funny. I went to business school, so I at least did take a finance class. Of course, it's been many years since then. And yeah, this stuff it can be confusing, but I love the way you break it down and the analogies that you've used make it so much easier to understand.
Thank you. That's what I try. I'm like, let me give you some terms that I'm hoping won't be too overwhelming because like to me as well, like I'm very much a visual learner. So like it's hard when you're hearing these concepts, especially for the first time, to just hear about them and not to like see graphics or things like that to help like people understand. One of the most basic graphics that I like to show people when I'm teaching about how to invest is this idea that you have to think of the process of investing kind of like having a bunch of nesting dolls, you know, like those little like Russian nesting dolls where there's like a doll inside of a doll inside of a doll. So when you go to invest, the first big doll is your brokerage account. That's your Fidelity, your Vanguard, it's your Charles Schwab, your Robinhoods, whatever. I'm not a huge fan of Robinhood, so that is not an endorsement, but my favorites are Fidelity. But so that's the big doll. Then when you open that up, inside of there, the next biggest doll is the account type. So that's where we're talking about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, taxable brokerage accounts, 401ks. So many people think that second doll is an investment, and it's not. So we want to make sure you don't stop there. These are just the different types of accounts that you can have, and each different account type has different benefits that are usually related to taxes. Then once you open that doll, inside of there, that's where you put your money in and you buy investments. So that's where we're looking at buying ETFs, buying bonds, buying individual stocks, buying the index funds and things like that. So kind of think about it like a 3-step process, but like
I love that.
You can't have the last tiny doll without the first 2 dolls. So it's that step-by-step process.
Yeah, that's so good. I've heard horror stories from people that were like, oh yeah, I thought I was investing in my Roth IRA and then it was just sitting there. For years. There's a horror story of somebody like getting to retirement who had done all the like that's heartbreaking because she had done the work. She had put the money away, but at no point was she like, this is not growing. What's happening here? You know? Definitely make sure it's being invested.
That's why we post about that all the time, because every single time we post about it, somebody's like, oh my God, I didn't know. And they discover like my money's been sitting in cash for 2 years or 15 years or whatever the time frame is. So if you take one thing away from today's podcast episode, check to see if you're invested. And like, if you see settlement account or you see money market fund or money market account, those are not the types of investments we are talking about.
Yeah. That's basically just sitting in your bank account waiting to be invested. Yeah, exactly. Such a good point. So I guess how can people figure out how much they need to save for retirement? What's like an easy way to calculate it?
Yeah, there's a very simple rule that's actually incredibly effective for ballparking where you want to land in retirement. And it's the 4% guideline. So the idea behind it is that you take the amount of money you want to be able to spend the first year in retirement. Okay, so we're not talking about how much money you want to spend today. that you're like, okay, this year I want to be able to spend $100,000. Well, what's $100,000 going to be when you retire in 35 years? Because inflation's going to be taken into consideration. So there's a lot of calculators online that you can like look at and be like, okay, if inflation averages about 3 years and I think I could live off of $100,000 in today's dollars, what is that going to be in when I hit retirement? That's the first number you need. So how much do you want to spend in year number 1 of your retirement? So if you're retiring in 5 years, that's a much easier number to come up with, but just search for an inflation calculator to get that number. So the next thing that you do is you multiply that number by 25. That's it. Multiply it by 25. So if it's $100,000, you need to have $2.5 million saved in retirement to be able to live off your investments until essentially forever. So it's because you can then safely pull out about 4% every year, adjusting for inflation and deflation, and never run out of money, because 25 is the inverse of 4%. And that's how you land on that number. So again, just to repeat it, because I know I just added more explanations in there that might be confusing. All you got to do to know a pretty accurate number of how much you need to have saved for retirement is take how much money you want to save year number 1 in retirement, multiply that by 25, and you have a ballpark. Now, some of you are going to be like, holy crap, that's a ton of money. Yeah. That's terrifying.
I was just about to say.
And yep, you hear 2.5 million, you're like, I thought I just needed to get to $1 million. And so many people think that they just need to get to $1 million, but like $1 million is maybe what you need in today's dollars. 20 to 30 years down the road, we're going to need more money. But keep in mind, any bit helps. It's okay if you're not on track right now, but you got to know, in order to be able to work towards something, in order to be able to ever get close, you got to know what you're working towards. So it's like day 1 is recognizing what you need to do. And then the rest is figuring out, how do I invest enough so that I can eventually get as close to this number as humanly possible? Yeah. The other thing I got to mention is like, keep in mind that 2.5 million or whatever it is, that's all encompassing. That includes your social security payments. That includes your, if you sell your house and live in a camper or whatever, that includes everything. And some people may have like other income and things like that in retirement. Maybe you've got passive income streams and things like that. So that number may not be as big as it looks. And there's some really great calculators out there. I really love the bank rate retirement calculator with inflation. That'll help you get that number of, here's what I have in today's dollars. What is that going to look like in 20, 30 years? Yeah. But I also really love the Nerd Wallet retirement calculator, where you can add in like, okay, but here are some of the streams of income I'll also have. Like you could put in your social security, if you have any pension payments, if you have any passive income, things like that.
Yeah. I think it's also important to mention, like, you're not necessarily putting in 2.5 million, like you're putting in whatever. I'm obviously not doing math right now off the top of my head, but you're putting in a certain amount, and then compounding interest is going to help you grow that amount to your goal. So
exactly.
Yeah. Can you explain what compound interest is and like how that works and why it's important to start investing as early as possible?
Yes. Great question. So compound interest is the beauty of the money that you made then making money for you. So compound interest is this idea that, let's say in a perfect world, you make 10% every single year on your investments. In year 1, let's say in this scenario that we're looking at, let's say that you put $10,000 into the stock market and then you don't touch it. You don't add more money. You don't remove money. You just let it grow. And let's say every year that $10,000 makes 10%. Well, year 1, 10% of $10,000, it's easy. That's $1,000, right? So you made $1,000 and you keep that invested. You don't pull that money out. Well, year 2, you make another 10%. But here's the difference. Instead of you only making $1,000, you make $1,100, because 10% of 11,000 is more than 10% of 10,000. So it's like on and on and on we go, where we're keeping that money invested. So now the money you made is also making you more money. So your money grows more the more you have invested. Now, a huge misconception is that in order for compound interest to work, you have to have it all in one account. That is not true. It's a collective thing. So like if you have $100,000 spread across a bunch of different accounts, it's still going to have the net impact that you need it to have. Now, you're not going to make 10% on average every year. That's not a thing. Like nothing's going to automatically give you 10% every year. You've got to recognize that that's an average. And compound interest is really just kind of this way that we can explain how investing works, but you're not really getting like an exact number every single year. But that's the idea behind it, is like maybe one year you're making 20%. Well, now that money that you made from making 20% is now going to grow or decrease based off of that new number. It's not going to be based off the original number.
Yeah. Love that. We definitely love making money without doing anything.
We do. And the more that you have in there, the more it grows. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about robo-advisors and what they are, what are some examples, and then some pros and cons of using one?
Yeah, so a robo-advisor is an algorithmic-based financial advisor, essentially. So what you do is you go to a robo-advisor like Betterment or Ellevest, and you fill out a survey usually of like, here's some information about me, here are some of my investing goals, here's what I want to do, here's how much money I have to invest, here's my risk tolerance, here's my time frame, all those things. And they'll say, hey, here's some suggested portfolios for you, or here's what we recommend you get put into based off of the answers that you just gave for your, retirement horizon, your investing horizon. Then you can accept it or not, and they will then go in and invest that money for you. Again, this is all algorithm based. And because it's an algorithm, not a human being going in there and managing your money, the fees are significantly lower. Like I believe Betterment's fees are like 0.25%. I think Ellevest has like a subscription fee where it's like $1 to $9 a month. The only free kind of robo-advisor that I know of is M1 Finance. They do they do kind of a mix where you can kind of DIY or you can use their pre-made portfolios, but they're not like a true robo-advisor. So in terms of the pros and cons of robo-advisors, pro is that you're not going to be paying a ton in fees. When we're using traditional financial advisors, the fees usually start around 1%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but remember that compounding effect. Fees compound just like our investments compound. So a 1% fee could mean like 30% less in retirement.
Wow.
So
that's crazy.
1%. Yeah, they're huge. Like we see 1% and we're like, oh, that's nothing. But actually it's very significant, especially if you stay with a financial advisor charging you that fee for a long period of time. Number two is that robo-advisors are not going to be biased. They're not going to be a human advisors. It could be biased towards certain products. They could be incentivized to sell you things you don't need. They have their own motives. They have their own, they're also trying not to get sued. So they may be putting you into, they may be putting you into something slightly more conservative than what actually suits you or what's actually the best choice for you. Robo-advisors also are not going to, like I said, they're not going to try and sell you certain things. They may like the company may try to like upgrade you and stuff, but like it's just an algorithm. It's not going to, do anything along those lines. The other big pro is that it gets you started. So it's like, to me, I'm a huge fan of people just getting started. I don't care if you use a robo-advisor. I don't care if you use a target date fund. I don't care if you even use a financial advisor. If it gets you started. What I don't want is for you to just keep waiting until I know everything I could possibly know about investing. Because I tell you what, you're never going to know everything that you could possibly know about investing. You need to get started. That's the biggest thing, is you have to get started. So that I think robo-advisors are incredibly helpful in that aspect. The cons of robo-advisors and why specifically a lot of my students will start out with like a robo-advisor and then eventually move to managing their own portfolio is once you learn how to invest, especially through the lazy way, you go into what the robo-advisor is doing and like you look at the portfolio they put you in and you realize, holy crap, I could be doing this all by myself. Like they're simple portfolios. They're always using index funds that are ETFs. But they do it for you. So because they're doing it for you, they're gonna charge you that fee. And like a 0.25% fee is not gonna make or break your journey, but it is gonna have an impact. It could be 10% of your portfolio over the long term.
Right.
So that's kind of one of the cons is like, you could be doing this yourself for free. You don't really need to be paying that fee. The other con is that they're not super customizable. So unless you're using like an M1 Finance, Ellevest or Betterment or Wealthfront or things along those lines, they usually have limited customization options. So like, for example, Betterment, I know has, I want to say around 10 different index fund options. And like, that's it. So it's like, even if you want to go in and decrease how much you're investing in bonds and increase how much you're investing in the international market or something along those lines, you only have a couple of different options, which is like, honestly, it's a pro and a con, because it's like the investments inside of Betterment are great. They're great index funds. They're great options. But like, if for some reason you wanted something that's not available to you inside of there, you're just kind of like, you're going to have to go with somebody else. You're going to have to go open an account somewhere else.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's a pro and it's a con, because again, keeping it simple is really important. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that's like a con. I mean, I guess another con is that these are relatively new products. You know, they haven't been around for a really long time. So we don't really have enough data to see what these people's portfolios look like over the long term. But I mean,
that's a good point.
Yeah, but that to me, that's not a huge issue. Based off of what they have people in, they're very similar to like 3-fund portfolios a lot of times, which historically do better than most portfolios out there. The other con I would say too is that they can be a little bit more conservative than what you might invest in yourself. So like I said, if you're in your 20s, like I personally wouldn't be investing in bonds. I personally would probably have a pretty low international exposure as well. And I'd probably keep it pretty simple with a very large allocation in just large cap US. But if you are using a robo-advisor, they're going to do it based off of the questions that you answered. And the questions that you answered may have been more aligned with somebody who's in their 50s because you're scared, because you don't know what you're doing. And so that's kind of the issue, is like, you don't really know what you don't know. And so that's, again, why I'm always such a huge advocate of educating yourself. Use the robo-advisor to get yourself started, but as soon as you understand enough to do this on your own, get out of there. Go do it yourself, Yeah. So it's like, I have mixed. I know some people in my position are like, oh no, robo-advisors are just another way for corporate America to take advantage of you not knowing how to invest. And I'm like, if it gets you started, that's okay. And if you want to leave eventually, that's also okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that you say the most important thing is to get started, because that is so true. Like we just talked about, the earlier you get started, the better. So yeah. And the 100%. more you learn, the more, I guess, we all learn and change the things that we do in the future. So as a result of what we've learned, I know, I just told you I had a baby in January. And she had her own brokerage account by the time she was like 3 weeks old.
Amazing.
Maybe even sooner than that. So I'm like, oh yeah, I'm investing for you early. Like I'm so excited to see how fast that grows,
That is so cool.
Yeah, starting as an infant. So,
but like, that's the power of education, truly and completely. And it's like in any of the scenarios that you get started with investing, I think that there always needs to be a basic level of understanding, because even if you decide to go with a financial advisor, even if you decide to go with a robo-advisor, even if you pick a target date fund, unless you understand what those investments are, you're never really going to know if they're the best fit for you or not. And it's like, you just cannot give your power away like that when money is so important.
Yeah. Well, tell us about the lazy way, because I'm sure a lot of people listening, that's what they want to do.
Yeah. I mean, the lazy way, I've kind of hinted at it already with the index funds. The lazy way is all about getting you set up so that you can really automate things and not worry about studying the stock market daily. I don't study the stock market daily. I have zero desire to do that. And that's really where a lot of my students are at as well, because obviously they picked the lazy way. So you could essentially have every single stock in the United States or in the entire world using like 1 to 3 index funds, depending on how you do it. What you invest in and how you invest in it is going to depend largely on your time frames, your risk preference, and your risk tolerance. But the idea is, once you figure out what your allocation goals are, like how much do I want to have in US, how much do I want to have in international, and how much do I want to have in bonds or other like wealth preservation tools? The idea is that you can set those investments up to have a monthly contribution going directly into those investments, and then boom, you're done. That's it. You don't have to look at it, because like, okay, I set up my investments. They're going to work on my behalf. I understand how these work. I understand the time frames that I'm working with. And I only need to look like once or twice a year to rebalance. And when I talk about rebalancing is your bonds are gonna grow more slowly than your stocks. So like, eventually your allocations that you picked in the beginning of like, maybe I want, 30% US stocks, 30% international stocks, and like I want 40% bonds, which is a pretty conservative portfolio. Eventually, you're going to have significantly more stocks. You're going to have like, oh, now it's up to like 50% US and 20% international. And then I've got 30% bonds. So if you want to maintain those allocations, you're going to either have to sell off something from your overgrowth of stocks in the US, or you're going to have to just buy more of the stuff that you're missing. That only needs to happen like once or twice a year, especially if we're not super close to retirement. Once you get closer to retirement, you got to pay a little bit more attention. But as long as you have those automations set up to do it on a monthly basis, the beauty of it is that you get to set it and forget it. You get to treat your investments like a bill so that you're always investing. And the beauty of always investing means you're going to be investing when stocks are up. You're going to be investing when stocks are down. You're going to be investing when stocks are somewhere in between. And that's called dollar cost averaging, which means that you're eventually the average cost that you're purchasing your investments at are going to be somewhere in between the great highs and the great lows. It's just going to be that average out between all those different moments that we see in the stock market, rather than watching and waiting and being like, oh my gosh, I'm going to time this and wait till this goes down 10%. Yeah. And then I'm going to buy, and then I'm going to, that's so stressful. It doesn't work. It's so stressful. It's super time consuming, and it just does not work. Yeah. And studies have shown over and over again that does not work. So instead, we remove that. We say, screw that. Instead of trying to time the market, we're going to spend time in the market. We're going to automate it so that we're investing every single month, or maybe even every 2 weeks, so that we're getting in all the time, no matter what the cost is. But we're doing it. It's going to average out. And because we're properly allocated with index funds or other investments, we don't really have a lot to worry about.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on index funds? Well, I guess target date funds, are they considered index funds or no? They're different, right? So okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, target date funds can be index funds. So they would just be called index target date funds.
Oh, okay.
Target date funds can be actively managed. They can be passively managed. It just depends on the company. So, or it depends on the target date fund. So if you go to like Vanguard has great target date funds. All of I always am hesitant to say all. So I'll say asterisk. I think all of them are like 3 fund portfolios with index funds. So like Vanguard, they're super, super low fee. They are investing in index funds. In my opinion, they are some of the best target date funds out there, because you're basically investing in a 3 fund portfolio, which a 3 fund portfolio, all it is 1 total US stock market index fund, 1 international index fund, and 1 total bond market index fund. So it's like with 3 funds, you have literally everything stock-wise in the world. Yeah. And then you have some bonds too.
Okay.
So target date funds, though, can be filled with actively managed mutual funds too. So that's why, again, you kind of have to know what am I looking at here? Because if you don't understand your investments, then you could be investing in actively managed funds that are going to do worse than index funds, and they're going to be more expensive.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because I know every 401k that I've had, like that's been, I think, like the main index or fund that they, have us contribute to. It's like everyone's contributing to their target index fund unless you change it,
Yep.
So I was kind of curious if you thought those were good, or if we should be going in and changing our 401ks.
It depends. If you're in a Vanguard target date index fund, you're probably okay. But here's the thing too: even target index funds, they're not customizable. So if you go in and you look at your target index fund, you're going to see at least 10% bonds, if not more. Then you're also going to see at least usually 30% international, which may or may not be aligned with what you want inside of your portfolio. So that's again why it's so important to understand, because if it's too conservative, those 10% average annual returns, those 8% average annual returns, those are not going to be a reality for you. So that's again why it's important to look. Again, though, going back to kind of what we were saying earlier, if it gets you started, I'm all for it. But in my experience, when my lazy investors learn how to invest, they're like, oh, I don't really want this. Plus, I'm paying an extra fee for it. So I'm just going to go buy my own and do it myself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, this has been super helpful. I think at the very least, it's a good introduction to help people get started. So thank you again for coming on and sharing all of your tips and expertise, and love the analogies again. Like, that's perfect. I think a lot of people will find it easier to grasp this.
Everybody's going to go buy bags of chocolates instead of individual chocolate bars. They're going to be like, you know what? I'm going to get those Halloween bags.
Yeah. So funny. So one of the last questions I always ask my guests is, what is the most important lesson you've learned when it comes to entrepreneurship or money management that you wish you had learned sooner?
Ooh, those are such different things for me.
Yeah, it could be either one of them. Yeah.
I'll talk about, Okay, since we're talking about money, I think for me, the biggest lesson has been that you are like, money and figuring it out is not above you. Like, as somebody who grew up in the creative space and has always been a creative person, I just kind of bought into like the starving artist mindset and the starving artist belief that like, if you're true to your craft, if you're true to these things, like, that's just how life is going to be. You're going to suffer. You're never going to have money. You're never going to be able to do any of the things that you want because like you're dedicated to this thing. And once I realized that actually, if I could learn how to get paid more, then I could actually do the stuff I wanted to be doing. I could have the dream life I wanted to have, but it all started with getting paid more and figuring out how to manage that money once I got paid more, because it's not, the solution is not just getting paid more. It's also knowing what to do when you get paid more. That's why I was constantly just like, oh, when I get the next promotion, then I'll have that emergency fund. And it never happened because I didn't know what to do with that money.
Yeah.
So for me, I think truly and completely the biggest mindset shift for me and the biggest lesson is just understanding that like the sky is the limit when it comes to your income. And like that is true. And it's also applicable to entrepreneurship as well. Now, granted, you also have to figure out what kind of a life you want. You also have to understand like what trade-offs you are willing to make and what you aren't willing to make in order to be realistic. But that understanding that like whatever it is that you want to do, however much money it is that you want to make, it is possible. You got to figure out what trade-offs you're willing to make for it.
That's awesome. Well, can you tell people how they can find you and connect with you online?
Yeah. So if you're listening to all the investing stuff and you're like, oh my gosh, this sounds cool, I want to get started, you can find everything we do at clobare.com, CLOBARE.com. We've got our free investing class there. We've got our free money guide there. We've got our free recession survival book. All of those things are on clobare.com.
Perfect. And we'll link to it in the show notes. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the First Hustle Then Brunch podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or learned something new, I'd love if you subscribed and left us a review. Another way to support the podcast is to take a screenshot of this episode and share it on your Instagram story. Tag me at First Hustle Then Brunch so I can repost it. Thank you so much for supporting the show, and I'll see you in the next episode.